This time, QPR 75-76, the 10-day dream.
No nay, never. No nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Dunn, as ever, making the case for Oxford United, and joining me is our king of the data, Jamie Rooney.
We're right in the heart of glam rock now, aren't we? 75-76, glam rock and glam footballers, where hair is big. And as we'll go on to talk about, Phil Parkes is advertising men's hairspray for Cossack.
I had to say, every bit of footage I've seen is just fantastic because of the whole era, the mid-70s. Every now and then with this team, you kind of see the players being into Stan Bowles, David Webb, or the various people being interviewed on the big match. And the collars are fantastic, absolutely glorious collars.
Those collars on those shirts go on for weeks, don't they? I mean, the amount of material put into those collars are incredible.
It definitely is. So we are doing QPR and their glorious bid for the title in 1975-76. And joining us this week is you essentially become our London correspondent. It's Stuart Burgess. Hi, Stu.
Hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me back on. Yes, I'm happy to be the London correspondent, even if it comes to talking about Fulham's local rivals, Queen's Park Rangers.
It's a sort of rites of passage, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually kind of doing some research on this, there's a lot of crossover between the two clubs. Lots of players and managers have had a foot in both camps at one stage or the other. So, kind of fascinating looking at it. And as you say, not least for the haircuts.
Before we dive into this team, obviously last time Stu was on, we were talking about the brilliant Millwall side and their glorious seasons in the top tier. And Jamie, you think we maybe, whilst covering Millwall in brilliant depths, we've perhaps missed a trick somewhere along the line?
Well, I don't know if they've missed a trick or just how brilliant that Millwall story was, but I remember we talked about with Stu when we did that brilliant Millwall story, and it was fantastic. Norwich City and Millwall occupying the top positions in the 88-89 season. We shouldn't forget there were two other teams that had quite an epic finish that season when Arsenal won the championship with the very last kick off the season. And no mention to Arsenal, really, other than a dodgy documentary where Tony Adams is yelling at the top of his voice, literally at the top of his voice at David Ellery, that he's a cheat. And little mention of Liverpool, the two teams that actually went for the championship.
Yeah, well, it's old hat, isn't it? Liverpool and Arsenal, really. I mean, I did actually celebrate Michael Thomas scoring that goal, though, because despite the sort of, the accepted sort of zeitgeist that if you support one London team, you should be anti-other London teams. I tend to support London teams against the rest of the country. So I was quite chuffed to see Michael Thomas do that. In fairness, when we were talking about it, though, Jamie, it didn't twig with me that was the same season.
Yeah.
So focused was I on the Millwall achievements. Yeah.
I know, and that was the remarkable thing about it. It's like if you mention 88, 89 to many football fans that can remember that far back, they're going to gravitate towards Arsenal and Liverpool. There we were, quite happily, talking away for what felt like about 3-4 hours at Millwall FC, and it was fantastic.
The obvious thing to do. We are looking at QPR and we're going back to the mid-70s. And sort of in my mind that QPR are a kind of well-established top division side. But Jamie, they're not really, are they?
No, they've floated around. They came into existence in the 1920s, the early 1920s, and they've really floated around in the lower divisions. I can tell you our favourite stat that we've had previously is that they have spent 25% of their existence in the Premier League, which is not bad. A lot of that was through the late 1980s when the Premier League was the top tier. Sorry, I said Premier League, didn't I? so easy to fall into that trap. 25% into the top tier, or 24% actually. But yeah, up until the 1970s, it kind of bummed around in the lower divisions, the third and the second division, and they won the League Cup famously as a third-tier team in the late 1960s. They had a promotion, they had a relegation from the top tier. Then they came back up in the early 70s, and this was under the guidance of Jim Gregory, an Arthur Daly character who kind of once wanted to merge QPR and Fulham, I believe, Stu.
Yeah, again, I sort of looking at this, doing a bit of research, it appears that Jim Gregory was actually a Fulham supporter as a boy, and had made his money in the car trade, and had initially tried to buy into Fulham to realise his boyhood dream. But in the happy days when low comedians were chairman of football clubs, Tommy Trinder was the chairman of Fulham at the time, and decided that he didn't want Jim Gregory's money. So Jim took umbrage and decided he was going to invest in QPR instead. So that's how that happened. And actually, for the majority of his tenure, QPR were pretty successful. So it was Fulham's loss, really. I think he kind of put his money where his mouth is and invested quite heavily certainly in the ground and the infrastructure of the club. As you said, Jamie, they kind of had been kicking around in the third division, got 2 promotions on the bounce, late 60s, and then I think they came back down again. There was Gregory kind of, again, looking into this, Gregory struck me as kind of obviously a man passionate about football, but also a bit volatile. And they got promoted twice, and on reaching the first division in 1968, Gregory sacked the manager, Alex Stock, before the season had even started, which seems to be a strange way of rewarding a man for getting you 2 promotions on the bounce. Then he appointed Tommy Docherty, who lasted about a month, and unsurprisingly, they went down after 1 season in the top flight. But I think underneath that, he'd laid the foundations for the success that was to follow, because I think they kind of got a very good infrastructure of the club. And if you look at the number of players in that 75-76 team that had come through the ranks, they were obviously doing something right at junior level to bring that number of players through.
I mean, I was struck actually by when you looked at this team in this season that actually, I mean, Dave Sexton signs a couple of players as the manager, but actually the groundwork is all there, and the number of these kind of iconic players who are playing in the second tier.
Yeah, I think a lot of the credit of that goes to Gordon Jago. Jago, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Jago.
Yeah, because the nucleus of this team was really developed by Jago. He made a brave decision at the beginning as well. He got rid of Rodney Marsh. Rodney Marsh was a very charismatic, talented, entertaining footballer, and put his faith in Stan Bowles. But what a decision that was. But he's also, he's brought in a lot of the key players that go on to feature in this team, and he's blending the youngsters Steve's referred to with some of the older type players, the Frank McClintock and the David Webbs, and he also, I think he signs Dave Thomas, who we can go on and talk about, who's an absolute wizard on the wing.
And I think you're right. The blend of the sort of the young players that came through. And if you look at those young players, you had Jerry Francis was the obvious, kind of star of that. But then you also had, Dave Clement, Mick Lee, who else came through then? But Ian Gillard, the other fullback. So there was a lot of the team were kind of come through from the youth. But yeah, you're right. Jago bought well, and I think you've already mentioned it. Rodney Marsh went to Man City, and with the money he got from that sale, he bought Stan Bowles, Dave Thomas, and Don Masson, I think, was the third one. And it must have been quite a brave decision because, as you say, Marsh was the star player at QPR and left to go to Man City. And a lot of Man City fans think that he was the reason they didn't win the title in 1972, wasn't it? Because they were ahead of, I think Derby ended up winning in 72. City were a few points clear. They bought Rodney Marsh and then went on a bad run, and Derby ended up finishing ahead of them. So not necessarily the wisest purchase.
No.
Malcolm
Tino
Allison was the
Esprit.
manager then, wasn't he?
Graham, you beat me to it. I was literally ready for the pause in Stuart's comments so I could get in with the Esprilla, the Keegan Esprilla mistake. But yeah, absolutely. It was the original Esprilla moment.
Well, very similar, I think. Very similar. But clearly, Jago obviously invested that money very wisely. And I kind of, when I was looking at this, my memory of this QPR team was that it was full of veterans. It was just old guys that had done it before elsewhere. And there was an element of truth about that. I mean, you had Frank McClintock and David Webb and John Hollins, who'd been at Chelsea, but they weren't all that old. I think why I think they're veterans is that all of them played a hell of a lot of games. So, like, Hollins and Webb were still in their late 20s when they went to QPR. I think McClintock was mid-30s. But looking at the team that kind of was the sort of regular team from the 75-76 season, something like 8 of that side played more than 250 games for Queen's Park Rangers, and a number of that side in their careers played north of 500 games. Like Hollins played a phenomenal amount of games through his career. I think it's something like 700 or something ridiculous. So McClintock, here you go. McClintock played 609. Hollins played a total of 744 matches in his career. Stan Bowles 507, Don Masson 485, Dave Thomas 463, Don Gibbons 457. So they all had long careers, both pre and post QPR. I think that's kind of why I've got it in my head that they were all old. Because they weren't. There were a few old guys, but they weren't all that old. And like Jerry Francis was about 24 in this season, 24, 25. He was quite a youngster, wasn't he?
I think this is a problem with the period of time with football because footballers just looked old back then. Even when they were young, they looked old. I don't know if it was just the diet, the lifestyle, the hairstyles, the clothing with the flares and the long collars. I don't know. They just looked old. We've had this conversation in the 80s with Greg Downs at Coventry City, 87. I mean, he looked in his 50s when he was playing in the FA Cup final.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was obviously, lifestyle, diet, and we touched upon hair earlier, and you referred there to hairstyles, Jamie. I don't think they were styles. It was just hair.
Yeah.
If you look at you look at the pictures of this QPR team, and indeed any footballer from that era, their hair just grew. It didn't grow in a particular direction. It just grew, and they insisted on sticking with the side parting, a lot of them. So you see people with like hair down to their shoulders, but have still got a side parting, and it just doesn't work, does it?
No, and it definitely is the age of the mullet as well. This is where the mullet comes from.
Well, I think Jerry Francis was the first ever man to wear a mullet. Yeah,
absolutely.
And he liked it because he stuck with it until about the mid-90s when he was manager of Spurs, didn't he? But
I don't think Jerry Francis has ever changed.
Right.
No, I mean, I haven't seen a picture of him recently, but I would imagine he's still got the mullet. But yeah, he had a mullet, and people that clearly shouldn't have had long hair had long hair. Phil Parkes, I mean, it looked like he was wearing a Busby, didn't it? Massive hair. Yeah, and the other one, who was sort of a bit part player in this, but again, you turn up these little gems, it was Don Shanks.
Fullback.
Who played he was a bit peripheral to this team, but he ended up kind of coming into the side more regularly later in the decade. But when you get the chance, check out his hair, because he clearly is not a man designed to have long hair, but he's just grown it. And he dated Mary Stavin, who was Miss World in 1976, who went on to date George Best. And if you look at a picture of Don Shanks and a picture of Mary Stavin, there's something quite life-affirming about that. The fact that a man with such bad hair can date such an attractive woman. That there's something very positive about that, I think.
Oh, there is. There's a touch of the old 1980s Deirdre Barlow about it, isn't it? Really, it's got that.
But Don Shanks.
Don Shanks, yeah, he's got that kind of. I don't know.
Yeah, and she was quite a good defender as well, I think, Deirdre. But yeah, I was still on the Don Shanks team. It's if you look at the lineup, and you said which one of these went out with Miss World, you'd never have guessed Don Shanks, would you? Possibly Stan Bowles, because I think probably because I view Stan Bowles as a very sexy player rather than what he looked like.
Yeah,
but you would never have said Don Shanks. He's the man for Mary Stabbing.
And you're absolutely right. You would pick the player on the grounds of their role in the team rather than the backup fullback. It's not that shouldn't be the one. And as you say, Stan Bowles is really I guess you have probably the two icons of this team, Jerry Francis and Stan Bowles. I think they're probably the two really iconic players on this. I think one of the curiosities of Stan Bowles is actually how little else he does beyond his time at QPR. And that career pre-QPR, that sort of struggled actually to get off the ground.
Yeah, he started at Man City, didn't he? And then I think they signed him to replace Rodney Marsh, and apparently Gordon Jago, Bowles was playing for Carlisle against QPR. And in that game, Jago identified Bowles as the man he wanted to bring in when they let Marsh go. So clearly he was a guy who could spot a player. There seemed to be quite a few, the term maverick in the 70s. There were a lot of players like that, weren't there? Tony Curry and Frank Worthington and Bowles. And whether he clearly liked the London lifestyle, Bowles, didn't he? Liked a bit of a gamble, and maybe just wasn't enormously ambitious to further his career, because he ended up going to Forest. But he was with QPR for a long time. I think he probably was one of the last members of this team to leave, whereas you probably would have thought, bigger clubs might have come in for him and given him a go. But
I think with Stan Bowles as well, I think he's a character off the pitch. He's an incredible talent. I mean, he's up there with George Best in terms of he's capable on a football pitch, and he was definitely being compared to George Best during this era as well. But he's probably a troubled character as well, because as we referenced, he had issues with gambling. I can't remember if it was Stan Bowles or one of his managers that said if he could pass the bookies the way he passed the football, he wouldn't have any problems. But he definitely liked to gamble. He definitely liked to drink, and I definitely think he was a bit of a womanizer. And I think he said that in some of his books as well. But he was also a bit of a rebel as well. Just some of the things that he did is just incredible. He signed a boot deal with Gola, and then at the same time he signed a boot deal with Adidas as well. So he's got two boot deals. So his way of solving that problem is to wear one Gola boot and one Adidas boot to please his two sponsors, just so he can maximize on getting the money. And I think a lot of the money was going into bookmakers. And I think there's stories from fans that when he was at QPR, he'll be in one of the bookies close to Loftus Road 20 minutes before kickoff, and the fans would go, "Aren't you playing today, Stan?" Look at his watch, and I've got bags of time. And literally 30 minutes before kickoff, complaining that the horse he'd put a monkey on had lost by a nose. I think, can you have Stan Bowles, the genius as a footballer, without the troubles? I think they go hand in hand, and I think that's why he probably did move from club to club, because maybe there wasn't a tolerance to persist with somebody you probably couldn't rely on off the pitch as much as you could do on the pitch.
There's a good little documentary and interviews with him in which he sort of talks about when he went to Carlisle. One of the reasons he went to Carlisle, we got sent to Carlisle, was like there was one nightclub there. There was nothing else. So he kind of had no option but to focus on the football. I think what's interesting, and as I say, Gordon Jago brings him in, and I find it interesting. I cannot begin to imagine that Dave Sexton, who takes over the job the year before, so kind of late 74, I think it is, I cannot imagine Dave Sexton would have signed him. And Dave Sexton, whilst he was at Chelsea, I think he'd fallen out with Alan Hudson and a couple of players. And my impression of Dave Sexton was that he wouldn't necessarily be a fan of the flair player, and he'd be more pragmatic. But that might just be because Dave Sexton was quite a tower chap as far as I could see.
Yeah, I kind of was wondering about that as well, because, so, as you say, I think he left Chelsea because he sold a lot of their good players because he didn't like their lifestyle. So, like Osgood and Hudson. But, Osgood went to Southampton, I think, and Hudson went to Stoke. And these are the days when you think that wouldn't happen now, would it? You wouldn't have kind of the, flair players being sold because of their lifestyle going to Stoke. Yeah, so Sexton takes over from Jago and inherits Bowles. And you kind of think, okay, well, how was he going to deal with that? And looking at it, I kind of think Sexton obviously thought, there's not a lot wrong here. I'm not going to change too much, because if you look at the team that kind of got them up and the team that sort of, kept them in the top 10 for the next couple of seasons, most of that team was already there. Yeah. But he brought in experienced players to add to the mix that was already there, and kept faith with people like Francis and Bowles and Dave Thomas, who was also a bit of a maverick and probably not in the sort of normal Sexton style.
I think it's about finding a system, isn't it? And this is where shape and the system is really important. And it's hard to gauge from watching the YouTube videos of QPR, but I'm pretty sure they're set up in a 4-3-3. It's not your traditional 4-4-2, which was very typical back then. I think he's playing Masson and Francis and Hollins, or Leach, who comes in as well, as a three in midfield. And then you've got Thomas and Bowles that have got license to just run the channels. And then you've got Don Gibbons up front, who's just an incredible goal scorer. And I think that goes back to Sexton being a bit studious. I think you're absolutely spot on, Stu. I couldn't agree anymore. I think he saw a good thing and thought, well, I'll just fine-tune it the way I can. And I think he was influenced a lot by the Dutch and the West Germans in the 1974 World Cup, because I think he was one of the only English coaches to go there in the World Cup. So he was taking ideas from these incredible teams, Ajax, Bayern Munich, the Netherlands and West Germany. He could see they were set up in this 4-3-3 situation, trying to play this passing game. I'm not old enough to remember this team, but when you watch the YouTube videos, you can see from the clips they're generally a passing team, and they play through the lines.
Yeah, and you mentioned about playing through the lines. I think you mentioned this on one of your briefing notes, Graham, about the first game of the season where Jerry Francis scored that goal against Liverpool, which ended up winning goal of the season. It was a fabulous goal. He does 2-1-2s, doesn't he? And one of them he does with Bowles, where Bowles flicks it back to him between his legs, and just a fantastic goal. And he goes through and strikes it into the corner, and lovely football.
Absolutely glorious goal. And Jamie, you're the king of the data. You'd know the answer to this, I'm sure. But I mean, how often that the first goal of the season you score is goal of the season? I mean, that is quite impressive.
I think it's
quite unusual, isn't it?
I think it is the only time. If you look back, I mean, I'll park unless you're interested, I'll park my problems with goal of the season, because it's very much a BBC thing. And it's whatever games they're able to show, and they're the contenders. So, and there's a period in the late 80s and 90s where they don't have the rights for the league football. Goal of the season is scored by a player playing in the FA Cup, because they do have rights for the FA Cup. Anyway, I'll park that aside, because that just sounds like I'm being a bit of a twat. But I think only Jerry Francis and Dennis Bergkamp have scored goal of the season in the BBC goal of the season in August. Everything else has been after the start of the season. I think Jerry Francis is in the first game of the season. I think it's the only time it happens. I did actually research this. But I do have a problem with not just the BBC goal of the month. I have a problem with Loftus Road's goal nets as well. Because it's a brilliant stadium. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stadium. But the goal net's so narrow from the touchline to the back of the net. It's sometimes hard to see if the ball's gone in, because it's in and out within a second. It's like Subbuteo goals. When you flick it in when you played that in the 80s, the ball's in and out, and suddenly there's some debate. Oh, I don't think that went in. And I literally was confused watching some of the goals that QPR. I'm going completely off road, Graham. We'll come back to goal of the season, but I just have a problem with the goal net and the distance between the touch line and the back of the goal net at Loftus Road.
Well, there's just no depth to the goal,
None.
is there? I mean, it is a great stadium for atmosphere. It's a very poor stadium for legroom, though, Jamie.
Yes, and visibility in some parts as well.
I think it must be the worst ground for legroom that there is. I go to Loftus Road once every 10 years or so, and every time I do, you initially think, this is brilliant, look how close you are to the pitch. But there's a reason why you're that close, because there's no room in the stands.
Yeah, I always demand an aisle seat when I go to Loftus Road. I say that, I think I've only been there twice. But
you saw this side, didn't you, Stu?
Yeah, I mentioned to Graham, actually, this was moving ahead slightly. I actually saw this team in the first game of the following season, the first game of the 76-77 season. And I think I mentioned I lived abroad for a period in the 70s and we'd come back on holiday. So the objective for me and my dad was to try and cram in as many games as we could. And my uncle lived near QPR. And so the first game of the following season was QPR versus Everton at home. So much excitement and expectation. You know, QPR had been narrowly pipped to the league table the previous season and, one of the most exciting teams to watch. And so I went there as a sort of 11-year-old full of joy and hope. And QPR lost 4-0 at home to Everton.
Wow.
And I think that was it. I think kind of the golden age finished there, literally the first day of the following season. Phil Parkes scored an own goal, and I watched this on YouTube actually, and it's a corner. He punches it up in the air, and then goes to catch it as it comes down, misses it, and it hits his elbow and goes in. And that was the point that their decline started. And they lost 4-0, and never really looked like after that emulating the success of the previous season, which was strange in a way because pretty much the same team were there for the following season. You know,
it's sort of strange, but also sort of fits in with this really bizarre narrative that there is during this period, because this is like I think the weirdest time, and it's like the complete opposite to life now as you watch Man City win title after title, or Man United win title after title, or Liverpool win title. You know, decades of teams winning titles after title. Whereas there's a run from 1960 through until this season where no team retains the title. It's a different winner each season. It's not even. I mean, Liverpool win. Across these 17 years, Liverpool win 4 of them, but there are 10 different title wins. Derby County win twice. What's going on?
Yeah.
It sort of feels like anyone can win during this period.
Burnley win a title, which is an absolute miracle. Yeah. Burnley has a population of around about 70,000 people. It's a miracle Burnley get in the Premier League this day and age. But to win an English title when they probably had a population around about 40,000 people back in the early 60s, miracle of a football team, Burnley.
Yeah. But, you know, it's not rocket science to say that that's because of the disparity of wealth now between the top sides and the rest of the sides is so much bigger. And there was a disparity of wealth back then, but it was largely around gate receipts because there weren't really any other sources of revenue. I mean, you had a bit of TV revenue, which was still in its infancy, but you know, merchandise really hadn't been a thing then. So it was just about how many people you got through the gates. And on the grand scheme of things, actually, the difference in gate receipts isn't going to make a huge amount of difference to your ability to buy better players or pay players better wages. So it was much more even, I think. And and there were less transfers, as we mentioned earlier. If you look at this QPR side, you know, a lot of them were there for the majority of the 70s. There weren't players coming in and coming out. And so, you know, you could get a situation where a team like QPR had a pretty consistent team for 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden challenged for the title because it all clicked. And I think football was much better for it, to be honest with you.
You're absolutely right. You look at someone like Stan Bowles, who, I mean, there are lots of other reasons why he might not have got the transfers that he wanted, but you have someone who is cap for England, falls out with England. He walks out with England with when Joe Mercer's manager, and it doesn't come back for 4 years and then plays again. But you have an England international, somebody who is considered one of the best players in the game, and he has 7 years playing for QPR. That wouldn't happen in today's game. They would get picked off.
Yeah, and that was the thing about teams got old, didn't they? Because there wasn't such a transient, a lot of transfers. Like the Leeds United side, they had pretty much the same first 11 from 69 to 75, and by 75. Jack Charlton was in his early 40s. Norman Hunter was God knows how old, and they all just got old. And I don't know what point I'm trying to make there, really, but I guess that meant that there wasn't the sort of dynasties where they weren't necessarily replacing players with decent players, unless you had a decent youth setup, which not many teams did.
Yeah,
but QPR seemed to have at the point before this season. They got quite a few players through from the youth team.
Yeah, I think, Graham, your statistic kind of really highlights a step change in English football. No football team has defended the championship in 17 seasons. And the following season, the 76-77, when Liverpool, who do pip QPR, and we'll come on to that, and they go on to defend it, that's the step change. That's when the era of dominance begins. It's literally when the era of dominance begins. It starts with Liverpool. Arsenal have a few championships in there. Then it goes on to Manchester United. Then it goes on to Chelsea for a brief period. And then it goes on to Manchester City. And you get the odd blip in every now and then, the incredible Leicester City story, Blackburn Rovers, teams that we've covered on this podcast. But yeah, this is the beginning of the dynasties, as Stuart's mentioned. And before that, they didn't really exist in English football.
And what's really frustrating, aside from the fact that universally everyone wanted QPR to win this title, it kind of ruins the stats if Liverpool go on and retain the title the following year. But if QPR had won this, if the season had finished when it should have finished and QPR had won it, then we'd have got to a nice round 20, and the 20th team would have been Nottingham Forest. And there you go, another first-time kind of winner. It just kind of fits the narrative.
And this is a glorious period, and we've mentioned some of these players as well. And I'm conscious that we're probably going to go to our little halftime break that we have in these things now. So I'm going to leave you with a question to come back to, if that's okay. So we've talked about Stan Bowles. We've talked about, I think Alan Hudson popped in there, Rodney Marsh. So you've also got Tony Curry, you've got Peter Osgood, you've got Frank Worthington and Charlie George. Just a handful, 7 glamour players from this particular era, all English in a period where the English national team is not doing anything in international football. Can you guess between those 7 players, those great players, Charlie George, Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington, Peter Osgood, Tony Curry, Alan Hudson and Rodney Marsh, how many England caps they have between them collectively?
I love it. We will have our break and we'll come back with our answers to that.
Hey, Graham, I'm just off to get my halftime bovril and pie. I heard we're growing. We're expanding. Like the universe, we're expanding. What else is happening? We've got so much going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to point you in the direction of the new, by far, the greatest team newsletter.
Wow, a newsletter. What could be news? Tell me more, Graham.
We're coming at you every week with a free newsletter, where we're going to go take a deep dive into one of the teams that we talk about on the podcast. Some weeks will be the team that we're doing this week. The weeks it will be one from the past, to be whichever random team we want to talk about. And we're going to try and use this to knit together one or two of the common themes that keep cropping up in this podcast.
Wow, and there are so many common themes as well. Next, we'll be making YouTube videos or something crazy like that, Graham.
Absolutely. So you can see us in visual splendor. Yes, so keep an eye out on YouTube and on YouTube Shorts, because we're going to be putting together a whole series of clips, mini clips and bits and pieces from our podcasts over the 3 seasons we've done so far. We thought a nice little way to pick out some of the more entertaining bits that we've covered over this period. How can people find that?
So we are on X still for the moment. That changed. I believe you are said and done, Dunn. I am Couch Pundito. We're also on Blue Sky, and we are in the process of polishing up a shiny new website, which will have this content and links to this amazing newsletter. By far, the greatest team is growing, and a new shiny website, is not so far away.
So, plenty to tuck into. Now, I think we might have finished our bovril. I've finished my pie. It's on for the second half.
Enjoy the second half, Graham. I can't wait.
So, welcome back. Jamie, you left us with a little bit of a teaser before we went on this, which was, we know that some of these great icons of the English game were sorely underrepresented. The Matt Letizier's of their day. If I'm allowed to mention him anymore, I don't know. So Jamie, remind us of the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, so it's the glam footballers in the glam rock era: Charlie George, Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington, Peter Osgood, Tony Curry, Alan Hudson and Rodney Marsh. How many games did they play for England collectively between the 7 of them?
So what I do know, I know that Stan Bowles plays 5 times, I think, for England.
Yep.
I also know that in Stan Bowles, not his last game, but the game which he storms off, he gets replaced by Frank Worthington. So so Frank Worthington plays at least once. I think we might be at sort of 70, 75. I know it's relatively few.
I'd go less than that. I'd say I've got a feeling Osgood played a few. I think he was around the squad in the sort of 1970 World Cup. The reason I think that is because, being a bit older than you guys, I remember collecting the SO coins from the petrol station, and I'm pretty sure Osgood was one of them. I think he had a few caps. Before I hazard a guess, Jamie, am I right in thinking Charlie George only won 1 England cap?
You are absolutely spot on with that.
I was at that game in the same trip. The same trip that, say, lived in Africa, came back to the UK for about a month, sort of August, September 76, took in the QPR Everton game, also took in England versus the Republic of Ireland at Wembley, and it was a 1-1 draw, and I'm pretty sure that was Charlie George's 1 cap for England.
You're absolutely spot on. Absolutely, that's fantastic. That is fascinating. The fact that you were there for that single cap.
That is bizarre. But I should let people know this isn't the most extraordinary thing or claim that Stuart is going to make in this podcast.
Make a very
because there's going to be a
very unfounded claim later on.
Very much looking forward to this later on, but we'll save that till the end. But go on, Stu. What do you reckon?
I reckon 27.
Wow. So we've gone mid-70s and mid-20s, 75 and 27. So I think Stu is just close enough, but it's pretty much in the middle. 46 England caps collectively. Yeah. Tony Curry, 17, by far and away the most. Those 7 players average approximately 7 caps each for England. Rodney Marsh.
Ridiculous.
Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington, Peter Osgood, Charlie George, only averaging 7 caps between them in that period. England, I must point out, for those who didn't know, didn't qualify for the World Cup finals in 1974, and they didn't qualify for the World Cup finals in 1978. Purely coincidental, I'm sure.
Yeah. Who were we picking back then, though? I'm trying to think.
We were picking Jerry Francis then, weren't we?
This is true. He was captain at one point, wasn't he? He was, in fact, very young England captain.
Yeah. 23 years old, I think he was, when he was given the responsibility of England captain. Kevin Keegan was in there at that point. I think Colin Bell was around that period as well. Yeah, I have a bit of a
Alan Mullery.
Alan Mullery, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I have a bit of a blank spot when it comes to England in the 1970s.
So most people, I think. Yeah. So did the managers.
It's interesting you mentioned Tony Curry, because Tony Curry, of course, comes in to replace Stan Bowles at QPR.
Yes, he does, doesn't he? And again, he was a quality player, wasn't he, Tony Curry? He
Very much so.
he scored some cracking goals. Again, I'm sure he scored a couple of goals of the season in the 70s.
Am I right in remembering he was also another player with uncontrollable, ever-expanding hair?
Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Big hair.
I mean, if you follow QPR during that period, you have basically gone from Rodney Marsh, Stan Bowles, Tony Curry. You've had over a decade of kind of genius,
real
kind
mavericks.
of
Entertainers,
maverick number 10s.
Yeah.
So we are going to get into this season. It's a brilliant season, but before we do, yet another rabbit hole. I need to talk about David Webb now. I could wait until we got onto a Chelsea podcast, but I'm a bit worried it would take too long to get there. David Webb, absolutely incredible footballer. Now, by the time he joins QPR, so one of the things David Webb is renowned for is that he wore every shirt number except, I think, number 11. There's like only one of the 1 to 11 that he didn't wear, but he wears the number 1 shirt, because Chelsea v Ipswich, he starts in goal. He doesn't just cut. There's even just an injury and he has to take over in goal. He starts in goal.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
So as I understand it, Peter Bonetti, the first choice, is injured. They've got a reserve keeper who's due to play the game, I think, over Christmas. And the understudy gets injured. And so the message goes out for can we get the third choice back? Now, the third choice has gone off up to the north because it's Christmas to see his family, and then to get stuck in traffic on the way back. So the third choice...
Up to the north.
The third choice keeper at the time for Chelsea, he arrives 3 minutes before kickoff, and they decide, well, it's too late now. David Webb he's in goal. He's got the shirt, so he's going to stay. He's going to play. The third choice keeper, by the way, was Steve Sherwood.
Went on to play for Watford, didn't he?
Yeah.
And his brother won a 400-metre hurdles Olympic medal in 1968.
Oh,
fantastic
knowledge. That's fantastic.
John Sherwood,
Wow.
Steve Sherwood's old brother, won. It was famously David Hemery won the 400-metre hurdles for Britain. John Sherwood came third.
David Hemery, he of Superstars, Super Fame.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going there. I've already got a David Webb whole thing to go into. But let's talk about superstars. Stan Bowles.
Yes.
1976.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stan Bowles. Now, Stan Bowles claims to have got the lowest ever recorded score on Superstars. I have managed to find his results from that episode. He's on. It's one of the more entertaining things. He does this interview a few years ago on QPR TV, I think, of some kind, and he gets asked, "Is there anyone in the game you didn't really get on with?" And he just Malcolm McDonald. Really didn't like Malcolm McDonald. He talks about he ended up on Superstars with Malcolm McDonald, and that Malcolm McDonald was they were in the canoeing, and Malcolm McDonald capsizes. And Stan Bowles is so busy laughing at this that he capsizes too. and what I can see in the kayaking, Stan Bowles, Malcolm McDonald did not finish. I won't keep talking about Superstars, I could forever. But what I like about the most of it, he finishes at the bottom alongside where is it? Actually, he doesn't do quite so bad, but the other guy who was in the competition, James Hunt. Stan Bowles and James Hunt in the same episode of Superstar.
This is peak TV, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
I mean, you got peak Bowles and you got peak Hunt as well. I mean, Hunt was just like,
That's just
oh,
Maverick City.
totally. What a wonderful place to be. What a wonderful time to live.
There's a beautiful piece of footage, and I'll put this out on the socials. In the shooting, there's a shooting. You might think, is it a good idea to give Stan Bowles a gun?
Yeah.
So he takes a shot, and they show him putting the gun back down on the table afterwards, and it goes off. That's another random shot. It's just, it's too good. The man's a legend, absolute legend. So David Webb played every position. He does this against Ipswich, but he has something else that he does against Ipswich, because David Webb also had a bit of a reputation for being a makeshift striker.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same season, having played in goal against Ipswich and having kept a clean sheet and them winning, in the return game that season, he plays up front against Ipswich as an emergency striker and scores 2 goals.
Wow.
As they win that game. In another game against Ipswich in a previous season, he is an emergency makeshift striker and he scores a hat-trick against Ipswich. I just don't know what's going on with Dave Webb. And
Strange magic.
Should we talk about QPR season at any point?
Yeah, let's do that, yeah.
I suppose we could do that. It is quite something, and we touched upon this right from the start. The first goal, Joe Francis scores this amazing goal, but it's actually a really stylish 2-0 win against Liverpool, and Liverpool go on to be the rivals in this title race. And then what's really impressive is 2 games later, their first away game, they follow it up. They've got a trip away at Derby County to the baseball ground. And Derby are the reigning champions. And QPR win 5-1, a Stan Bowles hat-trick. And, right from the start, this is a side that, if you weren't going to take them seriously before that, that really was a sort of a marker in the sand, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly hit the ground running, didn't they? And as we sort of touched on before, not a lot of personnel changes from the previous season. I think the only actual addition to what would have been like the first team was John Hollins came in from Chelsea, where he'd already played a truckload of games and presumably known to Sexton as well as an industrious midfielder. But yeah, they really kind of hit the ground running. They had Jerry Francis fully fit, Stan Bowles fully fit, and put a really good run of games together. And the fact that they managed to beat the reigning champions 5-1 after 2 games kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, how it was a much more level playing field. Yeah. That looks very surprising now, but actually, was it that unusual that teams could turn each other over like that? I mean, you'd be very surprised if a team that had finished mid-table last season beat Man City 5-1 away. But, then there was probably much less of a difference between the top teams and the mid-range teams.
Definitely so.
Yeah, you've touched upon it, Jamie. They're playing with this kind of flair and freedom, which is kind of epitomised by Bowles and Francis, these kind of free scoring. For Jerry Francis, a real free scoring midfielder who seems able to get up there. But for me, the one that really always catches the eye is Dave Thomas.
Yeah, wonderful.
Who, if you would say, Siri, show me a picture of the classic socks around the ankle, 1970s winger, it's Dave Thomas, isn't it?
Yeah, and he was another one who won very few England caps. I mean, I think he won a few, but and he was a good old-fashioned winger, wasn't he? And sort of drop his shoulder, knock it past, and beat the man for pace. It was in the days before assists were ever a thing. And I'd been interested to see how many assists Thomas got, because I would imagine he got a lot, because, they'd kind of, you'd have Bowles and Francis sort of pulling it out wide, and then Thomas putting it back in the middle. Given scored a lot of goals. Dave Thomas didn't score many, actually. He got 9 in that season, but the preceding season he didn't score any goals in the league, and the following season he only got 1. So not a prolific scorer, but I would have guessed if they'd had assistance stats back then, he'd have been towards the top of the league.
Yeah, I think it's testament. He's wonderful. I mean, he's the type of player I was always trying to model myself on when I was growing up as a kid.
Yeah.
Especially the socks around the ankles. I mean, that's a classic. I hate shin pads. I've always hated shin pads. But so he could get away with it because FIFA did bring in. It wasn't mandatory to wear shin pads until 1990, so you could play with that style, and it just looks. I remember Michel Platini doing it as well, and you just fall in love with the style of the footballer. Not so much the politician of Platini, slightly different flavour in your mouth. But quite interestingly, on the QPR website, they have this page called the Loft Legends, and it's the top 10 players of all time. And Dave Thomas is in it. Dave Thomas is in there with Phil Parkes and Jerry Francis, who represented this team. And one of our listeners, Keith Alderson, was good enough to share with us on a fan-based forum 6 of this QPR team, including Dave Thomas, are in the all-time QPR team. So it just shows you how much of a regard Dave Thomas was held in.
Now, funny enough, I stumbled across that all-time 11.
Yeah.
Bowles and Francis obviously are in there. Dave Thomas was in there. But you also had then, defensively, Phil Parkes was the goalkeeper that QPR fans chose as their greatest of all time. And then both fullbacks from this team, Dave Clement and Ian Gillard. Ian, who I probably optimistically would refer to as Uncle Ian. But I'm sure if I delved into what's it called, family tree or...
Yeah, who do you think you are, Stu?
Yes, that kind of thing. There must be a connection because... my mother's side of the family are Gillards. He's originally from Hammersmith. They're originally from Willesden. You're not telling me that that's just a coincidence. So I'll try and see if I can get some sort of DNA profile done on him. And if you invite me back, I'll be able to confirm or otherwise whether Ian Gillard is in fact my uncle. So back to the fullback. I mean, he and Clement both came through the youth ranks. And played in the first team at QPR pretty much throughout the 70s. And the interesting stat that I came up with actually with these two was that Ian Gillard played a total of 408 games for QPR, and Dave Clement played a total of 407 games for QPR. So that's league games actually. There was quite remarkable the fact that they played, literally as a career. Yeah, and went pretty much all the way through like that.
Well, what is incredible as well, that both Clement and Gillard almost play every single game in this league game in this season.
Yeah.
I think Gillard is an ever-present. I think he plays all 42 league games. And I think Clement misses just 2 towards the end, where Don Shanks comes in and plays in the fullback position. But
tearing himself away from Miss World. Don Shanks reluctantly comes on the pitch.
I'll do Saturday and I'll do Tuesday, but nothing more.
Yeah.
I'll go back out to Venezuela.
Yeah. So you say that, Jamie. I mean, the whole... Essentially, there's 12 players that play more than 3 or 4 games that season. You've got Phil Parkes, 42, Clement, 40, Gillard, 41, McClintock, 35, Webb, 38, Hollins, 32. They're all pretty much consistent. And the kind of one consistent player that we haven't mentioned much so far is Mick Leach, who played 32 games that season, but probably I get the impression he was slotting in when, players like Hollins or Bowles were injured, but he still managed to clock up 32 games. So, I mean, that level of consistency, that, you know, having 12 players essentially represent the team for the whole season is well, that doesn't happen on a Saturday afternoon now, does it? You know, sides are using 17 players on a Saturday. So
absolutely, yeah, it is incredible. And also making just a handful of appearances, Graham, is John Beck.
John Beck,
yeah,
one of our favourites. Cambridge is light years ahead. He's obviously learnt a lot from Dave Sexton during this period.
Yeah. But he lost his place to Hollins, I think. The previous season he played 29 games, Beck. And John Hollins came in and kind of took his place. But gained a degree of notoriety as a manager, didn't he? It was use of sand and loud music and things like that.
I'm trying to think if John Beck would have played in the same midfield as Terry Venables, who was
very
with
possibly
QPR right ahead of time. So again, it's weird that these two iconic managers of the English team.
Yeah, I think he probably did. I mean, Venables was there until 74, I think. And certainly
Venables just misses out being in this side, doesn't he?
Yeah. We haven't spoken much about Phil Parkes apart from his hairstyle, but when he left, and again, this ties back to the kind of level playing field and how things were different then. He left West Ham in February 1970. He left for West Ham, in February 1979 for 565,000. In February 1979, QPR were about to get relegated from the top flight, and West Ham were in the top flight. And the fee for the 565 was a world record for a goalkeeper at that time. So this is the equivalent of, say, a goalkeeper leaving Southampton now and joining Burnley for a world record fee.
Yeah.
That just wouldn't happen, would it? Very, very odd.
It is. I think he's an exceptional goalkeeper, and he's definitely seen that way by QPR. I think from an England international perspective, it's just really bad luck for him because he's playing in an era with Shilton and Clements, who are vying for the top spot. But he was always the third goalkeeper when you looked at the squads, and it just feels that he was denied so many opportunities to represent his country in goal because of these two, what were giants in the game at that particular moment.
Yeah. It couldn't help that Wolves also had a goalkeeper called Phil Parkes.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. There were only two Phil Parkes. So maybe some correspondence intended for the QPR Phil Parkes ended up at Molineux. Who knows? Yeah. Wolves in that era had a keeper called Phil Parkes as well. But again, statistical anomaly, which I say Parkes obviously legend at QPR, and I would have thought a legend at West Ham as well. In terms of league appearances, he made 344 league appearances for QPR and 344 for West Ham. So exactly the same number of appearances. So
that's brilliant symmetry.
An eye for detail, the fella.
Wonderful.
I like to think when he was getting towards the end, he was kind of, I'm probably going to give up on Tuesday.
Yeah. I'm not available next week. I'm out with Don Shanks.
What I'm always curious about this, but it's entertaining watching the footage back in 1975, and of course Phil Parkes and other goalkeepers, no gloves.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems extraordinary.
When did gloves become a thing?
Yeah.
So,
I have done this before, actually. It is around this particular period, goalkeeper gloves. I have done some analysis on this previously, but I can't remember for the life of me. But it is around about the late 1970s, 80s, where gloves become a feature, a more prominent feature. They are used. There is some kind of reference back into the 60s where they were used, but they weren't commonplace. But it's around about the 1970s, early 80s where they become more of a common thing for goalkeepers. It is incredible.
I just like the idea. Who was the first keeper who turns up at it? It was probably John Burridge. Kind of thing John Burridge would do, isn't it? He'd turn up with, John, are you going to try wearing gloves? I'm going to try wearing gloves. I reckon it could really help.
How much stick would he have got as well? The first keeper to wear gloves.
Yeah.
How much Mickey taking would...
Oh, what? Scared of the ball hurting your hand?
Yeah, I've just found there's a brilliant website which I've used before on these things called goalkeepersardifferent.com. It is fantastic. I haven't been on it for some time, but there is a whole history about goalkeeping gloves on there. So maybe, Graham, we can come back to this one about goalkeeping gloves, because I have looked at this. And Burridge is actually mentioned, and I can see I'm reading the page now. But have Burridge and Parks.
A groundbreaker.
They're in there with Joe Corrigan and Jimmy Rimmer. So we are talking about this particular period where goalkeepers were becoming soft.
Yeah.
So Phil Parks is keeping plenty of shutouts, and QPR have this fantastic start to the season. They only lose one game in that whole, almost in the entire first half. By the time they get to the playing Derby County again, just before Christmas, they draw that 1-1 and then they lose to Liverpool. And actually, they lose a few. I think they lose 4 out of 6 or 4 or 5 league games there. They're out of the cup at the same time. They sort of slipped down. I think they slipped to 4th at this point, and you probably start to think some kind of normality is going to catch up with them. And then QPR go on this just unbelievable run of form. So they win 11 out of 12 games in a row, which suddenly sets them up to be hot with 3 games left. And it's at this point, and they're beating everyone. They're playing some unbelievable football, and they get to this game against Norwich away. And I think whenever you look at any side who has, you only have a look at Arsenal last year. Arsenal, they lose that one game to Aston Villa, and everyone looks back at, that's where they lost it. They ignore the fact that they've had like 14, 15 wins out in a row.
Yeah.
You are eventually going to have a game where something quirky happens. You have an odd 5 minutes. The opposition have an inspired time, and that appears to be what happens in this Norwich game, where they'd have gone in expecting to win. The keeper has a worldie. They score a few odd ones. Strikers miss, and they lose that game 3-2. Liverpool then go ahead of them with 2 games left. That's on Easter Saturday. On the Easter Monday, both sides, both Liverpool and QPR, win. And so it all sets up to the last game of the season. I think there's a points difference between them at that stage. And everything's set up for the last game of the season. Unbelievable. What a brilliant finish you've got in this game. Except for reasons which are really you just couldn't see happening today when you have these 2 title contenders. The game doesn't happen on the same day at all.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre for a number of factors. That Liverpool were allowed to not play their game against Wolves because of a single player's commitment to go and play for the Welsh national team on the same day. And the reason for that is because the Euro 76, they're called playoffs, but it was the quarterfinals, and Wales were playing Yugoslavia on the 24th of April, which was also the final day of the league season. And it should stress it is the English Football League. Now, Welsh teams do play in it, but Wales has its own league. So it's an English league system. So Wales have got to the quarterfinal where they're playing Yugoslavia. Now, a bit of foresight. So Germany are playing Spain. West Germany are playing Spain at the same time. The Netherlands are playing Belgium at the same time in these quarterfinal playoffs in the Euros. Now, Spain, West Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium have all removed, before the season begins, league games over this period because they know it's a UEFA slot. The English FA haven't done that. Now, if England would have qualified for the quarterfinals and they only narrowly lost out to Czechoslovakia, who go on and win it with the Panenka penalty, what does the FA do in that situation if England have to play a quarterfinal? I mean, that's one big question. But how Liverpool are allowed to move the fixture to accommodate John Toshak to play for Wales is quite unbelievable, considering when you look at all of the games that Liverpool had played in the UEFA Cup to that point, and they played quite a few, every single game they'd played in the UEFA Cup in the midweek had been preceded by a league fixture 3 or 4 days beforehand. Now, they were playing Bruges in the first leg at Anfield on the 28th of April. They could have played on the final day of the season and they could have still beaten Wolves. I don't know. And Graham, I know you've spent some time on this, and I think I'm probably wearing my Liverpool bias hat on this as well, and I'm reining myself in a little bit. But I just think it's just big clubs using weight in order to gain advantages, and it just feels unfair.
I mean, what's really bizarre is Liverpool play the first leg of their UEFA Cup final against Bruges on the 28th, 4 days after this allotted slot. It's 21 days until the second leg of it. There's 3 weeks between the first and second leg. I mean, they could easily fit another. I mean, they didn't have to wait 10 days to play. It's really, really odd, the reasons for it. The other bits that are strange are why QPR didn't move their game. And maybe QPR had the choice. It might have been down. QPR might have had the choice and they might have decided, we want to play when we play. Because Liverpool are playing Wolves, 3 games get delayed or get put off until the 4th of May, 10 days after QPR's played their last game of the season. I should say QPR win their last game at home. They win 2-0, so they are sitting on top of the league. But 3 games don't happen, and one is Man United, Man City, the derby, and which I assume is connected to Man United being in the FA Cup final in some way, because they play, I think, Southampton that year. But the other game that is moved into the 4th of May is Birmingham, Sheffield United, and that is, I think, because Wolves and Birmingham are playing for the last slot. They are Sheffield United are already relegated. Wolves are 3rd bottom, Birmingham are 4th bottom, and I assume Wolves or Birmingham have said, well, it isn't fair if we don't play these games at the same time. So it's a really strange setup. But yes, extraordinarily, the league season wraps up on the 24th of April, and then you have these final 3 games which decide the title and the relegation spaces 10 days later. Another extraordinary thing about it is, so some of the QPR players, Jerry Francis, Stan Bowles, they get invited to the TV studios to watch the game. And I thought, this is brilliant. We'll be able to see some of the footage of them in the studios. It's unfold. But no, they just get invited to the studios because they've got a feed of the game. The game isn't on TV anywhere. It's just...
Right. No, it's not. John Hollins wasn't at the studio, the BBC studio. He listened to it on the radio. So he didn't get an invite to go to the BBC studios, or he didn't want to go because maybe they thought it was inevitable. But it is bizarre how QPR could be sitting top for 10 days when the season is over, and you still got this unfinished business. And I struggle to understand why Liverpool couldn't fulfill the fixture with Wolves on the 24th. And I think it's because John Toshak was unavailable because he had to play for Wales on that day in a Euro qualifier, which feels unfair on QPR. I mean, that's a Liverpool and Wales problem. That's not an English FA league problem or a QPR problem. Yeah, it probably has an effect on the outcome of things.
But that wasn't unprecedented in the 70s, was it? The season used to finish at different times. Yeah. I mean, famously, was it Derby when they won the title in 1972? They finished their fixtures a point ahead of Leeds, and Leeds had to play, funnily enough, I think it was Wolves again. And Wolves beat Leeds, which meant Derby won the title. And when they found out they won the title, they were in Malaga on a post-season holiday. So, so it just wasn't structured like that. And in an ideal world back then, I guess they would like to have finished on the same day, but it wasn't always feasible. It does seem extraordinary, though, if it was just one player that Liverpool couldn't field that enabled them to move it. It is bizarre.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that is the reason. That's the rationale that I've kind of come to because of how everything aligns. But I think this is a responsibility that falls on the shoulders of the English FA, because at the time they would have known the UEFA fixtures for that particular season. They would have known that would be a playoff match on the 24th or 25th of April where England, if they were competing, would have needed players. So they could have followed what Spain, West Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium did and just make that weekend free and finish the league season the following weekend, which I think was perfectly possible, and then move the FA Cup final another weekend.
What I struggled to see was actually when Liverpool requested the change either.
Yeah,
it might have been
exactly that. I can't find
there
it.
might have been several weeks in advance. But to Stu's point, actually, you're absolutely right. The example I think most people think of is 1986, when Oxford have celebrated their Milk Cup victory and fallen a bit behind in their league fixtures. And Oxford survive on the last day by gloriously beating Arsenal 3-0. But that's after I think that happens on the Monday, the Monday after the Saturday of the season's over. So again, the mighty Oxford have benefited from this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would have mentioned that, Graham, but I thought I'd leave that to you. But there was a thing, wasn't it? Probably similar sort of season when Norwich got relegated, and it was a fixture that hung out the back of the season, and Coventry were in the relegation zone, Norwich were out of the relegation zone. Coventry had to play Everton. Norwich had finished their fixtures. Coventry had to play Everton. Everton had already won the league, and unsurprisingly, Coventry won 4-1, thereby leaping over Norwich. And I think Norwich created a bit of a stinker, but what can you do? But it wasn't long after that they did start getting their act together and saying, okay, that's when it needs to finish.
What's incredible with the narrative of this game is Liverpool would be expected to win away at Wolves. This is a good Liverpool side. They've got Kevin Keegan, Toshak and Keegan going well. But for 75 minutes, the dreams, everyone's dream is that Birmingham are still behind in their game against Sheffield United. Wolves take a lead in the 14th, 15th minute. Steve Kindon, I think, scores. And they keep that lead all the way through. So you get to, I think it's the 74th minute, when Wolves are staying up and QPR are winning the title. And you are that close to it. And across a sort of a couple of minutes. Now, what it was in reality, I don't quite know. I mean, you'll probably find out one of the games kicked off 2 hours earlier. But just based on the timings of the goals, 74th minute, Terry Hibbett scores for Birmingham to equalise that game. That means Wolves are, and it doesn't matter what they do, Birmingham will stay up, Birmingham get a point there. And Kevin Keegan in the 76th minute equalises for Liverpool. And at that point, Stan Bowles leaves. He's watching this game at the TV studio. He gets up and goes. He knows that's the end of it. And actually, Liverpool through Toshak and Ray Kennedy get two more and win 3-1. And
Bowles has probably gone down the bookies to collect his winnings. He had a winner on 3-1 Liverpool.
It's quite possible, but I've also read quotes that he had QPR at one point were 33-1 to win the league. I think it was at the start of the season.
Really?
And I've seen quotes from Stan Bowles where he put some money on it. I don't know how much. He fancied it. He fancied the team. So he had backed his own team in a, I don't think a complete Ivan Toney way. I think it was...
Yeah. But we mentioned, Grant, you mentioned about the phenomenal run-in that QPR had. And their last 15 games, they won 13, drew 1, lost 1. Scored 33, conceded 11, 27 points out of a possible 30. And they still didn't quite make it. But, absolutely phenomenal running, really.
It is. And to give credit to Liverpool, it is a brilliant Liverpool team. And they go on. Liverpool win the championship and they go on and dominate. At this point, when they win the championship, they've only won 8. In 15 seasons' time, they've won 18. They win 4 European Cups. They win a couple of FA Cups. They win 4 league titles. This really sets up that period of brilliance for Liverpool. But there's also, and Graham, I think you might like this as well. This also sets up the beginning, the point of when David Fairclough became the superstar. Because David Fairclough was playing for Liverpool at this particular period of time. He hadn't scored a goal all season in the league. And in the last 8 games, he scores 7 goals.
Blimey.
And I think 6 of those are as a substitute. And I think 3 of those are in the 80 plus minutes. So I think the birth of the idea of super sub, David Fairclough, is born in this period of time that leads Liverpool, probably a tiring Liverpool. Then Fairclough comes in and is enough to galvanise the team over the line.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's an unbelievable close to the season because Liverpool win 8 of their last 9. They also beat Barcelona over 2 legs in the UEFA Cup. Go on to beat Bruges in the UEFA Cup final.
Yeah.
Liverpool hold their nerve unbelievably well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because so Liverpool, as you said, Jamie, then went on to dominate for the next X years, and QPR kind of went in the opposite direction. What does that say about the structure of those 2 clubs? And I think going back to the point we made earlier about that Liverpool had that boot room mentality, didn't they? So Shankly left, Paisley took over, and there was this consistency running through it, which I think helped them sustain the pattern of play and the belief and all that kind of thing. Whereas other teams, if you look at, say, the rotation of league winners, Leeds won it in 74 and Don Revie left after that, didn't he? He went to manage England. Derby won it in 72. Clough left the following season. Shankly left Liverpool. So there was a lot of managerial switching, and sides like QPR were bringing in managers who didn't necessarily have any history with the club, and so maybe that's something that Liverpool got right.
I probably need more details on this from next week. But I think Jerry Francis gets quite injured over the coming years. I'm not quite sure how he's so central to this team. Whilst we've talked about and we could do another pod on Jerry Francis. He's absolutely fascinating, but I think he doesn't play as
the following season. Francis only played 11 games, and Bowles only played 22. So that's the creative kind of heart of the team. Was largely disappeared, and they brought in Eddie Kelly from ex-Arsenal, who was I think he probably agreed the term workmanlike was a fair description. And I think also that they were getting old. We've said they weren't that old, but they weren't spring chickens, were they? And Clintock played the following season, and he would have been 37 then, I think.
Yeah.
And Dave Webb and Hollins are then into their 30s, and it obviously kind of they just couldn't kick on from there, and there didn't seem to be that long line of the wealth of players that have come through from the youth team, like Clement and Gillard and Francis. That pipeline didn't seem to be coming through, and it proved to be obviously good news for Don Shanks. Well, in one way, he had to spend more time on the pitch, but he kind of became a regular over the next couple of seasons, which he failed to achieve in the previous 3 or 4 seasons. So, a gradual decline, I think, set in for QPR.
They do have a run in the UEFA Cup, though, the following year.
Yeah.
And Stan Bowles scores 11 goals in that as well. A couple of hat-tricks in the first round. And they lose in the quarterfinals to AEK Athens on penalty kicks.
And as we said, Liverpool rode that out the previous season, having got through to won the UEFA Cup.
Yeah.
But Liverpool had a bigger squad, had more experience, and QPR kind of were reliant on a smaller core of players, I think. And, they probably just got a bit knackered. And good run in Europe, but I think they ended up finishing about sort of 14th or something in the first division the following season. So
and
then eventually Dave Sexton gets, I think, poached or tempted to take over it at United.
Yes,
I mean, an opportunity opens up because Tommy Doherty's playing away from home, I think. So And not for the first time, Dave Sexton
Dave Sexton
follows Tommy Docherty into the hot seat at a football club.
Because he replaced him at Chelsea, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen this in my own career, in that, if you've had a maverick manager that doesn't work, the replacement tends to be from the opposite end of the spectrum and be a bit of a dullard. And that would appear, the Tommy Docherty, Dave Sexton kind of transition is they've gone from one extreme to the other, haven't they, really?
That's a brilliant observation. Yeah, that's so true.
It's a real yin and yang, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's odd that none of the, probably Phil Parkes aside, none of this team went on to kind of do much else. I mean, we've kind of sort of already suggested that quite a few of them were already a bit long in the tooth. But Jerry Francis went to Palace, came back to QPR, didn't really do a great deal after that, did he? Dave Thomas went to Everton.
Thomas was at Everton for a bit, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think he did all right there, didn't he? But again, didn't set the world alight. Don Gibbons left for Birmingham City. We haven't really mentioned him, but he banged in a lot of goals for QPR that period, didn't he, Gibbons?
Yeah, and we talked about the 1976 Euros as well. Pre-qualification, he was actually the top goal scorer for the Republic of Ireland.
Was he?
Yeah, in the whole tournament for qualification. So it just shows that he had the quality to score goals at international level as well.
Oh, okay. Wonder if he played in the game against
Charlie George.
I saw it at Wembley.
That's got to be possible. He would be up there with the all-time top scorers for QPR, I would think.
Yeah, I'd have thought so.
I'm just seeing if I can find out. Don Gibbons, 5th highest goal scorer for QPR ever.
Yeah, and I can tell you Don Gibbons played in that game against England
Did he?
where Charlie George was playing.
Excellent.
And you would have seen David O'Leary playing that as well, which is really interesting.
Really?
I don't think that's the surely not the David O'Leary that went on to play for Arsenal.
Must be, surely.
Wow.
There can't be. There's only one David O'Leary.
Yeah,
I think that would be.
He must have. I mean, he probably about 16 then. But
yeah, he would have been incredibly young. But yeah, he did play up front with Johnny Giles.
Johnny Giles.
Yeah.
I can tell you that David O'Leary made his international debut as a teenager, coming on in a 1-1 friendly to all the England on the 8th of September 1976.
Wow.
The same game.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
This is an historic game. I wish I'd kept the programme.
Yeah, this really is.
Excellent. Okay, we should probably wrap it up. I've had too much fun on this one again. So we should get to ranking how good this QPR side is. As a reminder, we've got 5 categories: greatness, all-time greats at the top, true greats, touch of greatness, edge of greatness, and then our bottom category, blink of greats. Jamie, where are you going?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by quoting one of our listeners again, Keith Alderson. His sister grew up watching this team, and he was kind enough to send us a quote saying that she remembers them with a lot of quality and incredible togetherness. And I think we've talked about that togetherness in terms of like the right players coming together at the right time. And we've seen a few of these teams with Dave Sexton just tweaking a little bit. But I think this is touch of greatness.
Go on, Stu, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I'd go touch of greatness, actually. I think there were some very, very good players in that side. Some kind of underrated players like the fullbacks, some that had been, clearly Frank McClintock, possibly past his best at that point, but brought something to the team. And then, Jerry Francis, Dave Thomas and Stan Bowles, having those three in your side, it must have been a joy to go to Loftus Road and watch them every Saturday. So I'd go touch of greatness, I think, yeah.
I think that's spot on, isn't it? They basically touched greatness for 10 days.
Yes.
10 days, yeah. They were genuinely great. But I think fans, especially not just fans of that club, but I think actually football fans of that era would look at this team really fondly, and I think the heart would say true greats, but I think we have to say QPR 75-76, touch of greatness. I love that story. I love that. There's so many
Excellent.
characters in that team.
It is an
Yeah.
absolute joy to talk about that football team.
I want to do a whole separate spin-off episode about footballers appearing on Superstars.
Yeah.
I think our time will come, Greg. The time will come.
It definitely will.
I've got a whole page of outfield players that have gone in goal. And we didn't even talk about the opposite, where Stuart Pearce, in his moment of desperation, trying to get Man City in the UEFA Cup qualification places, threw David James on with 10 minutes to go up front, who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Rabbit in the headlights.
Excellent. Okay, well, we should wrap it up there. Stuart, thank you so much for expanding your London club brief.
Thank you very much again for involving me, guys. It's good fun. I do enjoy, kind of doing the research and turning up little nuggets of information, which I find quite interesting, and hopefully other people do as well. But yeah, good fun as always, guys. So thank you.
Yeah, Stu, I definitely appreciate and love your nuggets. So keep bringing your nuggets each time. They are the nuggets I quite happily digest and not have any guilt about. So yeah, Graham, that was great fun. Talking about one of the great teams of the 1970s. You know what? We just don't do enough teams from the 1970s.
We got quite a few, but we're going back next week. We are going back even further. We are going back into the 1960s, the Dallas Tornadoes and their 6-month global tour, which I kid you not, involves an American team in 1967 playing 2 friendlies in Vietnam. Stay tuned for that one. We'll be back next week with the Dallas Tornadoes.